Hello, everyone. Okay, so this is the opening session of CabinSpace Live, the 23 edition of Aircraft Interior Expo. Great to be here. My name's Dan Welch. I'm director of Valour Consultancy, a market intelligence provider. First of all, a big thank you to Becky and the team at Inflight, AIX as well, for having me on this part of this panel. I feel like a bit of a rogue, been amongst some big names here. But this session is on in-flight connectivity, quite a broad subject. But on stage, I'm joined with a few experts, 3 experts and 2 guys that somehow worked their way onto the floor. I won't name names. But we're going to be discussing the subject of technology and how this subject is evolving and supporting the passenger experience and delivering this ultimate connection. So this isn't about me, unfortunately. This is about these guys, and they're talking about what we can see happening in the market. So perhaps you can just give a quick introduction to each of you. I'll start with you, Neale.
Perfect. Good. So my name's Neale Faulkner, Regional Vice President based in the Middle East. I would have said with Inmarsat, but of course I can't say that now. It's Viasat, so here I am. Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm Bill Milroy, Chairman and CTO at ThinKom. It's a pleasure to be here. We're excited about the show, and please do look us up. We're in hall number 1.
Hi, I'm Aditya Chatterjee. I'm the product manager for commercial aviation for SES Net.
Good morning, Ben Griffin. I'm VP Mobility Aviation at OneWeb.
Good morning, Dave Helfgott, CEO, SmartSky Networks.
Brilliant, all very concise as well. No sales so far, it's brilliant. So I'd like to start, if we can, we'll work our way down the stack, the IFC stack, and I'd like to start at the very top. So we're talking about capacity coverage. I'd just like to it's been quite a disruptive few years with the arrival of Starlink, and I'm probably downplaying that level of disruption somewhat, but I'd love just to get your view on what you're seeing in terms of the trends at that level, at the satellite level and an air-to-ground network, just the ability to provide capacity. Like, what kind of trends and disruption have you guys seen at that level that you can perhaps describe to the audience? And we'll start with you, Neale.
Yeah. Perfect. We've been waiting for this moment for a very long time. I think we've all been talking about consolidation. We've been talking about companies joining together, about creating mega constellations globally. We're here. This is it. This is now the time for the airlines can really benefit from the constellations that are going up. And some examples is today with Inmarsat now becoming part of Viasat. It's incredible what's going to happen with the network. 19 satellites today, a further 10. I mean, from our point of view, we don't talk about capacity as a concern anymore. This is, what the airlines want is fast and free, and there's just a huge amount of capacity available to really deliver what they want. And that's coming through consolidation. It's coming through some of the disruptors as well. I think we've been waiting patiently for this time. The airlines have been waiting. The passengers have been waiting for a long time, and we're finally here. The story with Viasat is incredible. I'm new to Viasat, so I'm still learning a little bit about their network, what it's going to bring. But hey, these satellites are something special. So when we talk about the technology that's being utilized, and we talk about software-defined satellites, these are satellites that are not just laying a huge amounts of capacity across the Earth and wasting it. They are directed exactly where they need to be. They're adding resource to terminals exactly where they are, where they're going, and not wasting capacity. That means that we can provide a huge amount more capacity to our customers. And I think then it changes the conversation from capacity to service. And that's what airlines want to be talking about. They don't want to be worrying about speed. They want to be worrying about what we deliver to the passenger as a service. Incredibly excited. I'm glad we're here.
Yeah. And Chatterjee, anything to add to that from the SES point of view?
Yeah, so SES is very much a proponent of multi-orbit. So very soon you would see us introducing a global KA network, geocentric, but introducing the Empower portion of our MEO constellation as an integral part of this global network. So multi-orbit, I think, will be talked about and hopefully get very successful, and we see that happening. Open architecture is one of our mantras, so I think when you hear the OEMs going into what is classically a service provider's domain, which is hardware and services through MSPs, you will see that. So there's open architecture coming in. Interoperability, which is the ability of airlines to pick and choose service providers given the same set of hardware or terminal, that's also coming in. So we see three things, right? Global multi-orbit networks, open architecture, and interoperability.
Fantastically summarized. Ben, anything that you would add to that?
Firstly, I'd like to correct you, Dan, that OneWeb is a bid disruptor as well. You mentioned another company.
Apologies.
See on here, but so I think disruption through new technology is massively important, and it's not just new technology for the sake of it. It's actually delivering value and meeting the demands of airline customers, passengers, crew, other applications as well. So it's and I agree with the multi-orbit notion. However, we're able to deliver this this capacity, this supply, the service to the airlines, their passengers. It doesn't really matter whether it's satellite A or satellite C. It's making sure you get the right thing together. And if that's a mix of multiple orbits, then great. If you're operating in a geography where low Earth orbits can deliver all of that capability, then also great. But ultimately, there's been a number of interviews and articles recently. Ultimately, the IFC industry just needs to get a bit more acute into what it's doing and make sure we're delivering to what the market's actually asking for rather than what we as a company can deliver. And I think that's been a bit of a problem, a bit of a identity crisis over the last sort of decade or so. And a lot of suppliers have just offered what they do rather than actually think and listen more about what the requirement is and being able to service that. Multi-orbit does that very well. LEO does that very well in certain places, certain geographies, as does GEO, of course. Yeah. So there's no one answer, but I think the right thing is to leave the ego at the door and make sure you can deliver what's actually being required by the market.
Yeah, and just to touch on a point, what dictates whether an airline does look at multi-orbit or LEO or GEO only? Like what drives that choice?
So if I can go first, I think another part of the answer I forgot to give was that I don't think airlines should really care too much about how it's delivered. They should really understand and think about what do they want a connected aircraft to be as part of a connected airline, right? And then make that as part of their requirement definition RFPs when they come and ask for certain things, and shouldn't really care whether it's air to ground, whether it's LEO, whether it's GEO, whether it's MEO. They should only care about what is being promised, what SLA is being delivered, actually delivered, and not just contracted, and therefore what service that their passengers, their crew, their stakeholders on the aircraft are actually getting.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything to add, or?
Yeah, but I don't mind. Yeah, of course, multi-orbit is important to all of the satellite operators that we have, and including ourselves as well. We have HEO satellites to give us coverage over the North Pole region for those aircraft going polar. So there's like a use case where multi-orbit does matter. So you're giving yourself coverage where you didn't have it before. And I agree with Ben. I mean, multi-orbit doesn't really mean that much to an airline. Who cares, right? Multi-orbit, it's am I going to get the service level? Am I going to get the speeds that I need to delight my passengers? And that's what I said earlier. That now the kind of capacity, the coverage, that should start to die away a little bit, and it should be more about the service. So what is being added onto the satellites to be able to provide that great service to the passenger? So yeah, it's an exciting time.
Yeah, great.
Dan, if I can add
Yeah, for sure.
I think it's we're one level lower in the food chain, if you will, but we're very excited as an antenna supplier that the multi-orbit, multi-constellation.
Yeah, we need the mic.
Yeah. That's even better. We're pretty excited about this, and from a supplier standpoint, it's what we've been hoping would happen, that we would have the multi-orbit, multi-constellation, just multi-means. I totally agree that the passenger doesn't really care. I think what's changed now, and actually I think it's an interesting countercurrent, is we're seeing more verticals in terms of more integration, more consolidation, which is definitely good from a business standpoint. Potentially good, potentially not good from an airline standpoint in terms of being a sticky customer. So what we try to do is we try to keep everyone an honest broker in making our antennas so that they can work on everyone's different systems. They can work on GEOs, they can work on Inmarsat GEO or HEO, they can work on SES, O3B or mPOWER. And so this then allows the airline and the airframers indirectly for the airline's benefit to be able to have agnostic solutions that are multi-orbit, multi-constellation, in some cases multi-beam, and in some cases even multi-band. So it's all about not being a sticky customer, I think, from an airline viewpoint.
Just one more small point. Airlines don't like risks, okay? So multi-orbit right now, we talk about LEOs and GEOs. No one's actually seen them work together yet, right? They're coming, and eventually we'll get there, but airlines don't like risk. And you know, who's going to be the proper first airline to be switching between them? We've seen patchworks of networks before in IFC, and they haven't been hugely successful. So what I'm saying here is, if you are going to do multi-orbit, you really need to look at how you orchestrate that together, and not just mash two networks together, hope it works, and the airline won't notice, right? It has to be seamless. It has to be great. And that's where kind of the orchestration comes in. Yeah. It can't just be LEO and GEO just because it sounds good together.
Yeah, and one thing that one network that we haven't talked about yet, David, is the role of air-to-ground in all of this, because I know it's actually become more of a hot topic with networks potentially being scoped out in the Middle East, and in particular in North America, where we've seen a lot of activity historically in development with SmartSky. Where do you see the role of air-to-ground fitting into this multi-orbit, multi-network solution?
So our position is that air-to-ground generally, and SmartSky specifically, are complementary to SATCOM. So we're literally agnostic. We want everybody to succeed in the satellite space. Satellite does certain things very well, and other things less well, whether it's LEO or GEO or MEO, or even HEO, I suppose. And air-to-ground does other things well, and they work complementary in those airframes that can take wideband SATCOM antenna systems. And so as you move down airframe size, your options narrow very quickly. And when you get below, say, super mid-size business aviation, you really have very few. You have narrowband or air-to-ground as your viable options. And so there's a continuum of solutions, but certainly on the wideband side, air-to-ground complements where its coverage overlaps satellite communications.
Yeah, and do we all agree in terms of the addressable market for SATCOM in particular? Because I know that you mentioned supersized biz jets, mid-sized biz jets. Historically, it's been very difficult to install SATCOM, but I know with potentially upcoming hardware that potential addressable market is increasing developments on the hardware side. Regional jets seem to be a really big focus at the moment for vendors. So where do we see the limit for, multi-orbit to start with, and then also SATCOM? Like where does it become LEO only or air-to-ground and narrowband, like for you guys? And maybe start with Ben.
Yeah, well, we've got the luxury of ESA development, electronically steered arrays, an awful lot smaller without any compromise in performance. As an example, Intelsat have a Stellar Blue ESA installed on a CRJ, which they're using as their sort of test and demo aircraft. And we're definitely looking at the regional market there. And in our business aviation portfolio as well, we launched last year, or rather Gogo launched last year with Hughes, a small unit that will get on those sorts of size of aircraft that David talked about earlier. So we can come all the way down because it's LEO, there's less power required. You don't need as much bulk and as much stuff on the fuselage for those things. So we can take advantage of that and still provide the performance required as well without hulking great big hardware on there. And I know that certainly Bill's going to mention in a minute, being able to shrink things down and make them more efficient and things like that, absolutely great. But where we're coming from, ESA really suits LEO technology very nicely.
Yeah. And Bill, do you have any comments? I'll come to you, Chatterjee, as well, on that regional jet market for ThinKom.
Well, it's not a secret. I suppose it's not a secret that we're very much involved in the regional jet marketplace. We are excited because this market has gone up and down. It is a specialized market and I'm sure David would agree that the equipment weight, equipment power is uniquely. It's a more difficult business plan to close. There's less room inside the aircraft. So we, as a traditional single-aisle wide-body IFC antenna supplier, have really tried to sharpen the pencil, if you will, on all those different metrics, and we've come up with a great solution that you can see in different areas along here, and we're hoping to make some announcements about that in the very near future. The other point on the equipment, or in terms of using a GEO, MEO, LEO capability, we still think that that's a strong capability. Regional jets do migrate, not just in CONUS or North America. They do go out in other areas, and the airlines like to have that flexibility. I think the other part is the unified experience. What really the airlines are requiring now is a common experience. It used to be, well, on my wide body I'll get this experience, on single aisle maybe I'll get a different experience, maybe on the RJ I won't get any experience. Now it's all about this homogeneous capability, and so it really makes us have to up our game, if you will, to be able to provide that, and we think we're going to be successful.
I want to add to that. When we design any network for aviation, I think it's a given that we would try to fly as many aircraft as possible, including business jets, right? And that has always been the case. So when I say that we are getting into this multi-orbit network, we would accommodate business aviation. Now, on that one though, and the reason I think regional jets are hot now is finally the antenna, the terminal designer is taking that very seriously, right? Which is all good for us, right? So that is one of the technology dependent items, if you will, in the airlines or the business aviation owners' ability to use SATCOM, right? So I think that's also evolving, that's also getting more advanced, and over the next few years you will see smaller and smaller jets using the SATCOM opportunities just like the commercial aviation does today.
Yeah.
So that's positive news for us.
Yeah, and I know that we've talked about the airline shouldn't have to be concerned about where the capacity comes from as long as it suits the SLA, but like hardware choice that accompanies the capacity selection is really, quite pivotal during the RFP process and during the consideration set. And I just want to know, like, as an airline is looking through the spec sheet, which is incredibly technical, when we're talking about like choosing the right solution, obviously weight and size is a key part, but as we move into like multi-orbit, like what are the other factors, what are the other elements that really determine what the right solution is? And I won't mind going to Bill first on this one.
Well, we would argue that even though regional jets may go in the case of North America, in rural areas in Canada and such, that there are, by design, they must go to hubs as well. And in the hubs, there's a larger density of, the hub looks not so much like a rural area, but is a suburban or even urban, a higher density area. That's why we believe that the terminals need to be able to support this. And generally, we think that GEOs have some advantage in that area. That advantage may be less so in more rural type areas or more isolated areas where the ubiquitous coverage capability of the LEO starts to come through versus the advantages that a GEO might inherently have in terms of putting bandwidth where you want it, whereas a LEO, you get bandwidth everywhere, whether you're using it or not. We say kind of viva la difference. We think it's important, and this segues back to we really are believers, and we're walking the talk in the multi-orbit, multi-constellation arena.
Neale, do you have anything?
Yeah, so from my point of view, I speak to many airlines every week in the Middle East, and it's always three things. Timing, I mean, it's vitally important. All the airlines are ordering aircraft now. They need a solution that can actually work on their aircraft when they get delivered next year or the year after. They can't wait around. We all want the next best iPhone next year, but by the time you get there, the next iPhone is coming around the corner. So timing is really important, and we're lucky that we have an incredible partner with ThinKom, who's been flying the terminal for a very long time. It's proven, it's a great terminal, and the airlines love that terminal. So that's one of them. And of course, risk. They don't know what a terminal is going to be able to deliver in the future yet. We don't truly know. They're not flying on commercial aircraft, these future kind of terminals that we're talking about, ESAs, etc. So I think they're the two key, and then of course cost. So that's what an airline really needs to look at, is cost as well. I think the cost is starting to come down in the hardware side as well. So they're three key areas.
And David, any thoughts on what the most important pieces are?
I think Bill's spot on. I think the key to success for wideband satellite to any airframe is going to be the terminal technology. And if you drill down a little further, an antenna wants to be parabolic. That's the most efficient form of a satellite antenna. When you move to a flat antenna, you get inefficiencies based on something called roll-off. And so you have a cone on that flat antenna. Imagine this is the antenna. And once you get outside of that cone, the signal quality rolls off. So you only have a fraction, say 70% of the efficiency of a equivalent parabolic antenna. But to get on a lot of these airframes, or to have multi-beam for LEOs or non-geosynchronous satellites, you have to have electronically steered antennas. And so the trade-off is lower profile, higher power, higher heat. And then the gauge of the fuselage comes into play. Where do you put the antenna? Can it support the weight? Can it support the power budget? Can it support the heat? And as you get into narrower and narrower gauge fuselages, there are fewer and fewer places to put an antenna on top. And so you end up having trade-offs, as you always do in aviation, between what's theoretically possible from the satellite and what's actually possible in terms of regulatory and engineering on the airframe. What that translates to ultimately, whether it's a LEO or a GEO or a MEO, is lower gain than theoretically possible through the link budget. That's the equation that tells you what bandwidth you ought to be able to get to an aircraft or to any terminal. That means that you have to have, below a certain airframe size, something other than a wideband terminal. Even a very small KA or KU terminal from a LEO satellite is going to be very inefficient operating at low power. But the final trick here, and this is where antenna manufacturers really have their jobs cut out for them, is not the receive side. Receive is relatively easy, right? You want to blast bandwidth to an airplane so people can stream. That's great. That's a good aviation model. But it's the transmit side, which requires power and very narrow beam focus, right? So you don't interfere with adjacent satellites. Getting all of that right in a very small package that's low profile, low weight, low heat, low power is incredibly hard. And that doesn't matter if it's a low Earth orbit or a geosynchronous satellite. And so there's a certain theoretical limit when you put all of that into a giant linear equation about how much antenna you can actually get onto an aircraft, or what aircraft can take antennas like that. That's why my earlier statement, we're sure that the future for us anyway, especially focusing on business aviation, charter, fractionals and those, will include a combination of wideband SATCOM on the larger airframes with air-to-ground underneath, and then air-to-ground and narrowband probably for small airframes. We're already on aircraft, for example, like Boeing business jets, which is 737, that use both wideband and air-to-ground, all the way down to King Air turboprops, which can only use narrowband and air-to-ground. So we know it works. We know it's happening right now. But the real key to success for everybody up here today is the technology and the packaging of the terminal technology.
Brilliant. And one of the things that we've seen is the growing importance of line fit in this market. I mean, airlines want that installation to occur while the aircraft's still in the factory. It minimizes impact of downtime, etc. With Airbus HPC Plus, I know that we've obviously had ThinKom selected as a preferred partner there. I'd just like to get the view of the panel here on what a program like HPC Plus means for the industry, because I mean it effectively takes choice out of the equation, which in some airlines I imagine is a great thing, and in other airlines they prefer to have that choice. So I'd be particularly, I mean, Ben, what's your feelings on a program like HBC Plus, and does this indicate OEMs taking more of an influence in this choice?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Where to start? Obviously, from an OEM perspective, it makes sense to streamline the production of an aircraft to have one flavour for KA, one flavour for KU, and it's capable of doing multiple things. It simplifies the process, makes it a bit easier. I think the market will work out whether HBC Plus delivers the value that is intended, and those things. In terms of the choice element, I think because Airbus has worked pretty closely with suppliers, I think everyone's kind of got on board to the degree that they can to make that all work. So yeah, there is definitely, as Neale said, there's definitely a preference from an airline perspective to get stuff factory fit. Absolutely, there's no question about that. Don't disagree with it. As long as it makes commercial sense for the airline to do so, the warranties and all those sorts of things that make perfect sense. I think only airlines can decide whether things like HBC and if there's ever to be another OEM equivalent of that makes sense for them or not. It's very hard to generalise and say, yeah, it's great, and commercially and strategically it makes perfect sense. Yeah. It's a bit of a tough question.
Yeah, that's meant to be.
What you're here for.
Yeah, exactly. Your view, Neale?
Yeah. So Emirates, perfect example of a massive airline that makes big decisions, and one of those decisions was HBC Plus. When you talk to an airline, there's two different normally parts of the airline: engineering and then service delivery. For an engineering kind of organisation, they love SFE. It's simple, it's good, it's managed by Airbus. It's something that, even from a procurement level, it's easy for them to buy as well. They can add it into the finance, and yeah, it makes sense. And as long as the technology that's being utilised, which is the ThinKom terminal and HBC Plus example, is there, then you're going to have good success. It's so we're very proud to be the MSP on HBC Plus and for KA, and I mean, all of the discussions I have, it's first thought in the mind of the airline, which is, this is what we want, and so it's good.
So what does it, I know you've been obviously on the right side of the decision for KA, but from a hardware manufacturer point of view, I mean, does it impact the addressable market? Does it change a lot, like for you as a hardware manufacturer, these kind of programs?
Well, I think it adds to the market. Maybe I'm looking at two glasses half full, but it adds to the market because this is, airlines. My feeling is, and I'm not sure everyone would agree with it, is the airlines are not a homogenous group. So there's big airlines that prefer to do things themselves. There are small airlines that prefer somebody else that they can rely on. We want to cater to both. I think it's interesting at ThinKom, because if you think we're like generally once or two levels removed from the airframers in terms of making the decisions, and certainly from the airlines. We used to never have airlines come to ThinKom, but wow, now it's very common to have airlines come because they're saying, hey, we're going to take this equipment potentially and put it on our plane for 10 years, and we want to know what we're putting on our plane. Is it built with quality? What are the capabilities? Is it future-proof? So we get that opportunity to sell. It's more like an Intel, or now I should say NVIDIA, kind of inside pitch where people aren't really buying the NVIDIA or the Intel. They're buying something that has that, so they're asking for the system. So it adds to our addressable market, and we may or may not have time to go to this, but that's not to say, there's still the retrofit market. And then I think there's also the rip and replace, which is the revisit of the retrofit market. It's all happening, and we think HBC Plus, we're very proud of that, and we think that's a great capability, and in some airlines, Emirates is a great example, that is the way they want to go, so that's the way we want to go as well. The other part from a supplier standpoint is it's so easy to underestimate what's involved in getting a line fit capability, or I used to think when we first got in the industry, DO-160, oh, you get DO-160 and now you're all done. But of course that's just the beginning of the journey. The STCs are expensive and time consuming, and the line fits, I think I'm not sure exactly why it takes so long, but 3 years for a line fit is not unusual. and a lot of money gets involved in that. So the ability to, if you will, reuse that line fit or equivalent line fit capability, that approval, and use it across multiple airlines from a supplier standpoint, that's cost effective for us as well.
Chatterjee, do you have anything else to add to what's been said?
Yeah, since you bring up HBC Plus, we are the second MSP. So, look, I mean, we have always believed in open architecture and interoperability, right? And I think those concepts will be proved or disproved through HBC Plus. So we are eager to see that, of course. We support that. The thing about HBC Plus, though, which needs to be proved out, is how the operational structures would work, right? Which now here you have an OEM providing hardware support, installation, maintenance, and you have an MSP providing everything else, right? That's new. So again, the success would prove of how this operational support can be made efficient. That would be a key factor of this. Saying that, I think it's a positive thing. It increases our addressable market, and we look forward to working with it.
Just one more point as well, being the second MSP, right? Imagine an airline now, they've got the choice of the power of SES, the power of Inmarsat, now Viasat, and on an equal footing, right? As an airline, you're going to love that, right? It puts us toe-to-toe, equal footing, right? I mean, that's what this industry needs. So it's a giant leap forward for the industry.
Yeah. And we talked about interoperability there. David, I'd be interested in your view of, there's a vision of interoperability of not having to rip off hardware to access the service of another vendor. I think that's the silver bullet where we're heading towards.
Yeah.
Is that genuinely achievable, like in your view?
It is achievable. It's obviously a systems integration challenge. You have to have antennas in the right frequencies to access different networks. You have to have a KA capability and a KU capability and an L-band capability, and in our purposes, 2.6 frequency capability on the bottom of the aircraft. Once you get that signal into the aircraft, then of course you can hybridize those networks. But interoperability between KA or KU carriers, that's often a waveform issue, not a frequency issue, right? Different modems, non-standard modems, make it very difficult to go from one KU to another KU network. So interoperability often isn't about the antenna and the constellation at different orbital planes. It's about the network, the modem, the waveform, and then the integration on the aircraft.
Go on.
Yeah, and as a part of this, if you will, becoming an MSP, okay? One of SES's requirements was multi-waveform. And I think that's why I picked on this, even on KA, right? So I'm a strict believer that for global networks, multi-waveform and seamless migration from one infrastructure to other is a key of the future. Whether you talk multi-orbit, multi-waveform, you cannot do this through one waveform. And that could, in the future, lead to the simplification of KU and KA. But from day one, when we become EIS, and I think I say that for Inmarsat as well, multi-waveform was a requirement. So the dual modman, the famous dual modman, is a reality, right? And if you make that a reality from an SFE perspective, meaning from an OEM perspective, it's a big thing, right? So which means an OEM has accepted that.
So what kind of time frame are we talking about for this?
Now, this guy is much ahead of me, so
Well, we got Bill as well. I feel. Do you have any comments on the interoperability conversation, where the pain points are, and?
So the modem is a buy for us, or the modman is a buy for us, and so I think we just had a press release out. We're with Contron as an example. We have a dual modman that we're developing with them that actually has the ability to put a third modem in, and it goes to what Aditya and what David are referring to. So we very much like to see eventually a movement to a software-defined radio-based modem, and I think the hardware has finally gotten to where it needs to be to support that. Now there maybe are some more of a remaining but significant business issues in terms of licensing and such for the different waveforms. But we're a big believer that multiple waveforms, we have to communicate with the modem, we have to do all the other parts in terms of ephemeris data in the case of LEO or MEO constellations, knowing where to point. So all those protocols are very, very important. But I wanted to throw one more item out on interoperability. I think David sort of alluded to it a little bit. And besides the waveform, I do think we're starting to see interoperability issues with respect to frequency, because these frequency bands, not to get too techy in it, and certainly this is customers, airline passengers could care less about this, but we're starting to see as the KU band and KA band becomes more and more crowded, more and more reuse between these, and reuse is a good thing, but we're starting to see interference issues. And I believe we're going to see some regulations coming down, or these may even be simply enforcement of regulations that have been waived before with respect to NGSOs and GSOs working together. We see two things happening there. One is it's going to put more requirements in terms of adjacent satellite interference, the quality of the beams, the quality of the side lobes, it's all the techie antenna stuff. But we also think frequency band-wise, eventually, it won't replace, but there is talk, and we already are doing that at ThinKom, moving to Q and V band, or adding Q and V band. There's between Q, V, and E band, that's 20 gigahertz of baseband that's available. That's, typically at KA we have 3.5 gigahertz, at KU a little bit less, but now we're talking about 20 gigahertz of unclaimed bandwidth. We think it's just, if you follow the way the demands are evolving, we think it's just only a matter of time before those will need to be added. And we're already starting to see that on the government side already, on the gateway side already, on the commercial, and we think soon on the user side.
And there's a whole other session that could be talked about just on that trend in particular. I think given the time that we have left, I'd like to conclude by talking just about how all of this development is supporting the passenger experience, this ultimate connection. And Ben, I'm going to come to you first on this one. What's your view of what that ultimate connection is today for the airlines, and how are these? Do you think these developments are taking us in the right direction to support that?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely taken us in the right direction. I think, I was thinking a bit about this yesterday, not about the questions, I didn't know it, but terrestrially, things have accelerated so quickly over the last decade in terms of how people consume app-based, cloud-based, all the rest of it. And we've always, for very good reason, been a bit behind that curve in aviation. So what we're trying to do, and what we're all trying to do collectively, is make sure that the passengers of today and the next 5 years are equipped from a service perspective to do what they need to do with their devices. That includes certain applications working, it's certainly cloud-based stuff operating properly. And as far as we're concerned, I'm sure as far as David's concerned as well, is that low latency is a really key part of that. Again, it plays into this multi-orbit thing quite a lot. And low latency can only physically be achieved with low orbit stuff or air-to-ground stuff. It's a fact of physics, really. So I think it's understanding where all this is going and make sure that we as an in-flight connectivity supplier community are able to sort of predict what the needs are going to be and sort of try and keep on top of the curve rather than trying to keep up with it all the time, which is what's happened really in the last sort of, not so much recently, but certainly up until the last 2 or 3 years, we've really been behind it. And it's hard to do it, right? Satellites take a long time to build and launch traditionally. They're obviously much quicker and easier to do it now en masse with things, for example, SpaceX and how they launch and things like that, and the manufacture of smaller satellites and getting them up into orbit. So yes, we're all going in the right way. I think we're all starting to pull together and address what ultimately passengers want to do in the next 5 to 10 years rather than just satisfy the current need.
Yeah. And David, do you have anything to add to that from an air-to-ground perspective?
Yeah, so let me sort of turn the question 90 degrees, if you don't mind. To us, there are 3 sort of domains on the aircraft that the connected aircraft. And in-flight communications, of course, gets everyone's attention. How do you stream movies? How do you do video teleconferencing while you're flying? How do you access the cloud or go through a firewall or go through encrypted networks, all which are very latency and off aircraft bandwidth dependent, right? Those are key, but that's one of 3 areas. The passenger experience is also relates to the quality of the flight, and those relate to the other 2 domains in the aircraft, which can be served by the same properly configured, it's called broadband connection. That includes telematics off the aircraft, flight operations. That includes augmented data to the cockpit. So the electronic flight bag might have additional content that can be provided to help reroute a flight or make it more fuel efficient and so forth. All of those together have direct impact on the passenger experience. Streaming Netflix is really important. Having a video call at 30,000 feet is really cool. But getting to your destination on time and having the aircraft operate efficiently and having less turbulence in your flight are also very important. And so we really are focused on the full aircraft connected experience. Of course, the tip of the spear is the back of the aircraft and the passenger experience, but it's also the flight operations and cockpit that matter. And so
Yeah, perfect. Chatterjee?
Yeah, I would just add, I agree to everything. I would just add that in my company, when we say that we are going to build this global KA for commercial aviation or business aviation, you start with the passenger experience. You start with the customer experience, right? And if you look at all the technologies we are sponsoring or supporting, each one of them at the end has to relate to that, right? You talk about software-defined satellites. You talk about intelligent ground systems. You talk about adaptive resource control of capacity. Each one of them, when developed, has that one key thing in mind. How do you provide the right experience to the airlines and their passengers? So I think that ultimately is where you will see that air travel, air connectivity, right, is extracting the best technologies possible because they're purpose built for exactly that purpose, right? And I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, perfect. Neale, anything to add?
I think what passengers want is fast, free, and seamless, right? That's what they want. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you are giving them the right capacity at satellite level, not having a thin layer spread across the Earth, but software-defined satellites. That's exactly what it's doing. It's laser focusing the resources to the terminals. That's where over hubs, you're going to give that seamless service all of the time, and it's going to be fast. I think we're steamrolling as the airlines now are just sprinting towards fast and free, and it's exciting for the passengers. So again, there's other initiatives happening. So the seamless air alliance that are bringing in certain methodologies for passengers to connect, and so these are the things that we need to do, and we need to support to make sure that the passenger gets what they want.
Yeah, we've done so well throughout the whole session, and then I thought you were going to say there's only one way to do it, and that's with Viasat. And I was like, Neale,
do you want me to?
No, it's fine. It's fine. We've done so well, and I was like, but you did well. You did brilliantly. Yeah. So thank you. I'm getting daggers, ready to finish. Is there any question? Are we allowed to ask questions? Yeah. Are there any questions from the audience at this point? Or have I done such a good job? Oh, Satu, okay.
Thank you. Saturday Inflight magazine editor. I have maybe a random question, but when would you all estimate that all airlines, be it regional, low cost, or full service carrier, will have full connectivity on board for passengers to enjoy?
Wow. It's an amazing... it's almost impossible to predict it. I think where are we now? We're about 40% maybe on wide body. We've still got a long way to go. So certainly not this decade before you're going to have all aircraft fitted. And there's so many, the other thing that airlines are doing, extending leases of the aircraft. So they're flying around older aircraft now because we're so limited. And will they put connectivity on those? I'm not sure. So will we ever get there? I don't know. I hope so. Yeah.
With connected aircraft, right? I mean, when OEMs build aircraft which are connected to start with, which they don't right now, right? That's where you will find that all aircrafts coming off the assembly line are already connected, right? So when that would happen, we should ask the OEMs.
I think it's important also to realise and remember that there's huge parts of the Earth terrestrially that don't have connectivity. So, and those people who live in those regions of the world don't necessarily have devices because they have no connectivity, and therefore, if they fly on aircraft, they have no need for connectivity. So, there's this big disparity between the connected and the unconnected, which is what OneWeb's all about, and trying to connect to the unconnected. Sorry, Dan. Shameful plug.
If he can do that, I can do my bit.
No, you've said enough already. So I think to answer your question, I think you'd probably look holistically more terrestrially first to give you an indication of where that gets to. But it's certainly not this decade. I don't think it's next either.
When are we going to have all electric cars? It's almost the same question, right? Electric cars everywhere, same as connected aircraft, right?
Well, I'd like to say a big thank you to you all for giving your time today, and appreciate if we just give them a round of applause, our panellists. Thank you. And to you guys for sticking around, and sorry for the plug there. I did say there were two people that managed to find their way up. One of them revealed themselves at the end there. But anyway, I just encourage you all to hang around. There's a full agenda right here, and I'm sure Becky will tell you what's happening next. So thank you.